Seikajin minasan, konnichiwa. It's March 16, 2011, and this marks 5 years since the Great East Japan earthquake. In Japanese, they call that the Higashi Nihon daishinsai. Higashi meaning east, Nihon meaning Japan, Dai meaning big, great, or mega, and shin meaning quake. Earthquake in Japanese is actually jishin, and sai, which is disaster, because it was more than an earthquake. We had the tsunamis and the nuclear meltdown also. So in this video, I wanted to take time to reflect on the events that happened 5 years ago. So if you join me in doing that, I'd be very happy. I'm also going to put a link to the videos that I had from 5 years ago. You can check those things out if you have the time. But anyway, today's video is kind of a reality check of what actually happened back then. But to make things interesting, I wanted to flash some numbers up and see if you can say them in Japanese before I say them in Japanese. And following that, I'll give you what those numbers actually represent. So here come the first set of numbers. And they are 3, 11, 2011. And those numbers represent the date of the earthquake. It was March 11, 2011. And the next numbers, look at these. They are 2, 46. And these numbers represent the time of the earthquake hitting at 2:46 p.m. on that day, which was a Friday, just like today. The next number, Q. And that number represents the magnitude of the earthquake. This is our next number. That number is 6. And this actually represents 6 minutes, which is the actual duration of the earthquake from its beginning to end. Next number is a little bit tricky, but here we go. That's 2.4. And that represents 2.4 meters, which is representing Honshu, the main island of Japan, actually moving 2.4 meters to the east as a result of this earthquake. These next numbers, they are 10 and 25. It's said that the Earth's axis actually shifted 10 to 25 centimeters as a result of this earthquake. Our next two numbers are 26, 35. And they are 26 minutes and 35 minutes. At 3:12 p.m., which is 26 minutes after the earthquake hit, the first tsunami hit the shores of Japan. And at 35 minutes after the earthquake, which is at 3:21 p.m., that's when the big tsunami waves started to hit the shores of Japan. And that actually spanned 500 kilometers from Iwate Prefecture all the way down to Ibaraki Prefecture, tsunami waves hitting the shores. And those tsunami waves actually went up to 40.5 meters. That's 133 feet. Okay, our next numbers are 41, 60. And these represent 41 minutes and 60 minutes. 41 minutes after the earthquake hit at 3:27 p.m. is when the first tsunami waves hit the nuclear power plant in Fukushima. And 60 minutes after the earthquake at 3:46 p.m. is when a big tsunami wave actually hit the nuclear power plant and flooded it out, which is when they say the actual nuclear meltdown began. Anyway, these are a bunch of numbers that I'm sharing with you, but I'm just going to post the rest of them in the notes below so that you can check that out. And I'll leave some links to the resources that I actually got this information from. But anyway, if you allow me to share just a little bit, I live down in Saitama, which is right above Tokyo in the Kanto area. And we're about 350 to 400 kilometers away from the actual epicenter of the earthquake. But I can still remember vividly having a late lunch and then heading over to a meeting. But I was at a traffic light getting ready to take a right turn when I started to feel dizzy. And that was the beginning of the earthquake. And I remember making the right turn and seeing the electric poles doing this. And I just thought, my gosh, that's going to snap. But anyway, I remember pulling over onto a side street and just seeing people running out of their houses. Didn't know what was going on. Eventually made it to work, to my meeting, and my boss said, you know what, go home. So I was very lucky that my boss was very fair in doing that. And I was able to pick up my daughter immediately. And I'm just so grateful for that. I remember not being able to contact my wife. Cell phones were down and transportation systems were down too. The trains weren't running. Eventually, at about 8, 9 o'clock at night, I was able to contact my wife and we told her that we're going to go pick her up in Tokyo. Started heading down there and there was just major traffic. But I remember there's the tons and tons of people just walking out of Tokyo to go home. And this was March in the evening, and it was super cold because you still had winter-like weather at that time. That day was a very hard day, but I think the days that followed is when we could actually really feel it. That's when, we could feel that we couldn't get water, you couldn't get gasoline, your basic necessities. I mean, electricity was down. They had rolling blackouts. It was just a trying time. But we made it, and Japan is surviving, and people are getting through it. Anyway, thanks for sharing the time with me. Continue to pray for Japan. ありがとうございました。またね。Uh, it was just crazy. Uh, but just so thankful that we were able to make it through this difficult time, because